It's Magnus Carlsen taking on his countrymate Aryan Tari. Norway number 1 versus Norway number 2. Magnus, of course, would have preferred not to face his friend and countrymate at this event where there are still 64 players left, but that's how the pairing works. Aryan adjusts his pieces. His rating is right now around 2600, but it has been 2672 at some point. Magnus, of course, has worked it with him in the past. So this is going to be a very interesting battle. Carlsen fills in the score sheet, gets ready for the game. We have 1 hour 30 minutes for 40 moves and then an additional 30 minutes for the rest of the game. It's a 2-game mini match, so whoever scores a win in the first game gets a massive advantage going into the second one. Magnus adjusts all his pieces. Generally he does that when the time has started, but today he's come well before the start of the game and we are ready to go. There we have it. The clock has started. Magnus opens with 1d4. Well, Magnus can play literally any opening move in the opening. He can go d4, c4, e4, knight f3, but today it's d4 and Aryan plays knight to f6. Will Magnus play the London system today? Not really. He goes for the more classical approach. He goes for c4, gaining space in the center. And now Aryan has to decide what way he's going. He goes e6. He puts up his pawn and it's a very solid approach. Magnus says, I'm ready for your queen's Nimzo Indian opening. If you come bishop b4, I'm ready for it. And Aryan goes for it. Nimzo Indian is considered one of the most solid systems, but at the same time, black is trying to be a little more active than the Queen's Gambit decline, where you push your pawn to the center. It's a more hyper-modern approach championed by Aaron Nimzowitsch. E3 played the Rubinstein system here. Yes, you close down your bishop, but on the other hand, you built up a strong center and you're happy with it. So castles played by Aryan, and Magnus now plays bishop d2. If you look at the clock, Magnus has already used up 5 minutes here, which means that he took his time to choose what he wants to play. And Aryan now hits in the center with c5. The more common move is to play d5, but c5 is also a very legitimate option. a3, the bishop is attacked and you kind of must take the knight, because if you don't do it and if you go back, then I can simply win a pawn with d takes c5 and protect it with b4. So Aryan chops off the knight, bishop takes c3. Now Magnus has the bishop pair, and that could mean quite a serious edge if Aryan isn't careful. But here black can recover it back by simply playing his knight to e4. There you have it. Now you want to take this bishop, and Magnus says, I'm not going to accept the double pawns. I'm going knight e2, so that if you take, I'll take back with my knight and still have the strong center. So Aryan is in no hurry to exchange. He goes b6, and the bishop can pop out on this long diagonal, but also can jump to a6. That is very much possible. Magnus closes down the center with the move d5. This is a very well-known opening position, and we have had many top players playing it, with Wesley So against Aronian, Caruana versus Aronian. Aronian is a big fan of this opening with black. Bishop a6 played, and now Aryan is hitting the pawn on c4. The main move played here has been b3, but f3 is what Magnus plays, and he tells Aryan that get your knight out, and if you take here, I will take back with my knight and my bishop will protect the pawn. So Aryan takes it. He takes the piece on c3, and of course Magnus captures it back with the knight. But guys, there is a tactic in the air. Can you spot it? You can see Aryan is thinking about it. He sees it, but he's down to an hour on the clock, 22 minutes behind Magnus, and he takes the pawn. Now, what is the point here? Well, the point is, if you take with the bishop, the queen swoops in here with a check and takes the bishop off. So has Magnus blundered a pawn? Well, not really. From his expressions, his demeanor, also the time on the clock, you quite clearly understand this is all his preparation. But isn't that amazing? The engine is giving small edge to black. Well, if you use a stronger engine, then generally it will say it's roundabout even, and yet this is Magnus's prep, and I love this next move, h4. What sort of prep is this, guys? Think about it. Magnus is a pawn down, his king is in the center, these pawns look weird, they kind of feel like a lot of air around the white king. Black king is safely cuddled in, castled, and he's going to get his knight out. Why is this still played by Magnus? Well, Magnus has studied it at home and feels that it poses enough problems to black. His other idea is h5, h6, and this is kind of the modern preparation that we see in the world of chess, where one idea cannot be played again. Like if he plays this again, people will prepare it and come and literally kill this. But when you play it for the first time, the opponent does not know what is the best way to react to it. Here he takes on d5, and Magnus for sure is still in his preparation, and because this is the most logical move, and he takes the pawn. Knight takes on d5. But also now that the pawn is gone from d5, Aryan's knight can develop to c6, and I think he should do that. He should also take care of his time, because he's down to 41 minutes. 15 moves have been played, 25 more to go for the 40 move mark. So knight comes out to c6. Now what is Magnus's plan here is the question. Well, black wants to go rook e8, put pressure here. Magnus plays this little move b3, and look at all his pawns on the third rank. This is a very interesting move, because now Aryan's queen cannot go anywhere here. It has to go either on b5 or a6. He goes to a6, but notice the queen and the rook. Now Magnus can actually fork them with knight to c7, and he does that. He jumps in with the knight to c7. Hey, but there is a check here. So is that, if the king moves, then rook c8, and black is completely better. So queen a5 check. Of course you don't want to play king f2. The only move here is to attack the queen b4, and here you get time, because now you're attacking the queen. Yes, the pawn can take it, c takes b4, but then I get a chance to pick up your rook. So c takes b4 played here by Aryan Tari, and now just take the rook on a8. That's what Magnus does. Knight takes on a8, and the material has been imbalanced quite a bit here. White now has 4 pawns on the board, black has 7 pawns, so he has 3 pawns for the piece. But now there's a check to the king, and he wants to pick it up on the next move. So if you go king f2, then I'll simply take your knight here. Magnus, instead of going king f2 here, has to decide whether he wants to play queen d2 and play the endgame. These kinds of assessments are not easy, and that's the reason why Magnus is taking his time, because after queen d2, which he has just played, now you have to think what is the best move for black. In fact, here it's not at all easy for Aryan to figure out, because if he was prepared, he would have played a move like queen c5. Now how is this move even working? Because after knight c7, you are a piece down. Not a piece, you are a rook down. But then there's knight e5. I'm threatening here and the knight. You go knight a6, I take on f3, king f2, take on d2, take c5, take here, and then rook h d1, and the position is equal. So this is the prep. Queen c5 is a good move, but actually Aryan takes it. In fact, instead of taking here, he could have also played the move queen f5, hitting here, but all of this you can't do without prep. So he goes for the simple option of queen trade, knight takes. And now let's assess this position. Magnus is going to pick up the pawn. Yes, he does. So it's 6 pawns for black and a knight versus 4 pawns for white and a rook. So you have rook which is facing knight and 2 pawns. That's roughly equal material balance. But Magnus is known for his endgame prowess, and such positions against him are very risky, because he will find the most minutest way of putting pressure on you. And here he goes rook a6. Now again, think very carefully. He's understood that giving up this pawn is fine, and he kind of blocks in these 2 pawns, because if Aryan takes here, then he will move his king up, and Aryan does take it. So Now Aryan has a knight and 3 pawns for a rook, which is very good material imbalance. But the problem is his rook is passive on a8 and his pawns are stuck. So Magnus now and comes back, and I mean he has 1 hour 3 minutes left. That's why you can see he's just kind of relaxing around. King f2 played instantly, and now the rook is coming here. So let's say if you go knight c4, I go rook a1 trying to win this. You try to block it with your knight. I go rook d1 and I attack this, and this is attack. So this would be a big advantage to white because his rooks are getting active. So knight d5 played by Aryan, and I think this is a very, very good move. Logical move. He brings his knight here, and maybe Magnus has to choose between rook d1 hitting the knight or rook a1. He goes for rook a1, putting pressure on the a7 pawn, and now it's not possible to defend that pawn on a7. So might as well bring the king in here, because what the king will do is he'll come and he'll protect the knight. So king f8 played by Aryan, good move. He's found a good move here, and the position now is kind of simplifying and crystallizing into a situation where after Magnus takes, you want to take the rook because the rook is very active. It's attacking here, and if you don't take it, the other rook will also move in very soon. So takes, and this is what the position has crystallized into. Knight and 2 pawns for a rook. King comes up, and what Aryan is saying is that my knight protects the pawn, my king will protect the knight. You have no real way to make progress. Magnus first sort of stops the knight from moving by keeping an eye on this pawn. And what Magnus would love to do is gain space on the king side and then slowly bring his king in. But h5 played. This is actually a good move by Aryan Tari. He's kind of limited Magnus's options on the king side, but Magnus goes g4, and his point is, Aryan, if you take here, then I'll take back, and then I'll be able to create a passed pawn this side. So g6 played, and now you can actually take the pawn on. Oh, he goes rook b8, and he's waiting for the time being, because now the rook not only keeps an eye on this pawn, but it can also go this way and attack the pawn. So clearly Aryan does not want to take on g4, because after fg4 there is an opportunity to create a passer, and this is the important thing for Magnus. He needs a passed pawn. So good move played by black. He goes king d6. He's maintaining the status here, because whenever Magnus takes and attacks the pawn, he can go back with his knight and defend it. Of course, it's only Magnus who is trying to play for the win here. It's not like Aryan has any chances to win. But now king g3. The important thing here is not to touch anything, but to start playing on the queen side. So a line could go take, rook h8, b5, and you start pushing your b pawn very quickly. And this is just an illustrative line to show you how black can draw in such a position. But Aryan actually blunders here. He goes for the move f5. And why is this a blunder? Now look at the things carefully, because after takes, Magnus can go and attack this pawn. So it will become a situation where Aryan gets on the defensive. He's not using his b pawn to create counterplay. So Magnus now has to realize that he must take on h5 and then go rook h8. But what Aryan has on his mind, and the thing is that after take, rook h8, he's not going to get on the defensive, because that allows the king to come up. But he's going to play an intermezzo here, which is first a check, push the king back, and then save the pawn. So he's kind of, okay, Magnus takes it. He takes it. Of course, if there is a best option for white, Magnus is going to find it in over the board play. He's so good. He goes rook h8. He attacks the pawn. And now here's the key point. Not to move the knight, but to actually give a check first, so that the king is pushed back, and then you go to save the pawn. And of course Aryan is going to do that. He has just 5 minutes. He plays f4, king f2, and now you go and save the pawn, because if you lose this pawn, it's big trouble. The h pawn starts running down the board, and it would be a big thing. So you need to save it, and that's what Aryan does with knight f6. Now if you could maintain status quo here, do nothing, knight defends the pawn, king defends the knight, you have two pawns, passers, it looks great. Because whenever Magnus comes and attacks here, you just rotate your knight, you go back and forth. But chess is not so simple like that. In chess, there is a concept known as zugzwang, and you will see that is going to come into effect here. Aryan plays king e5, and Magnus understands zugzwangs and all these concepts like no one else in the world. He goes king d3. He's just very calm about this entire endgame. He's not hurrying, he's just being there. Right now he's saying that your knight is tied down, my king is coming up, you need to make a move, because if you go back, my king comes up even further. So Aryan says, I have pawns, I can wait with my pawns, and I'm not allowing your king to go there, and if you get too quick to go that side, then my knight and king will start gobbling up your pawns as well. So rook h6, again a move that's not so simple to understand. He's keeping an eye here and here. Aryan pushes the pawn to d5. He has only a few pawn moves left, but he also has the b pawn to distract the king if needed, and then use his knight and king to attack these two white pawns. It's not so simple, but it's possible. Magnus again makes a small little waiting move, keeps the rook active, and also says the knight can't move because of rook g5 check. So b5 played by Aryan. He's slowly and steadily pushing the pawns. He's moved to move number 38, and he still has 1.5 minutes. So 2 moves to make in 1.5 minutes seems okay. Here Magnus goes check. Okay. And now Aryan needs to move his king down, king e6. And this is where I really like Magnus's next move, because if he plays king up, then black pushes the pawn. So what he does, he puts his king on c3 and tells Aryan, what is your next move now, my friend? Because if you go here, I could just attack the knight and the pawn. So Aryan goes knight d7 and sets a trap. If you take the pawn and are greedy, then the knight jumps to e5 and you lose this very critical pawn, after which the game is a draw. And so Magnus of course doesn't fall for it. He simply comes here king d4, which is a very nice little move. He comes up to the board and stops knight e5, and also there are no checks with the knight. You're threatening this. So Aryan comes back with his knight and defends both his d5 and h5 pawn. It seems like white has improved his position to the maximum. How does Magnus now create the next inroad? Well, the thing is, you don't really keep on banging your head at the same thing. You create new opportunities, and that's what endgame is all about. You go rook g7. Magnus is going to put his rook on the other side, give a check, force the king to move, and then come in with his own king. That's how amazing this plan is. b4 pushed by Aryan, and now the most logical move would be rook b7, right? But actually knight d7 stops rook b6 check, and that's the reason why Magnus goes rook a7. Brilliant chess, just finding all those little nuances and still keeping 53 minutes on the clock. Insane play. And now Aryan goes knight g8, because he didn't have a move. His opponent was threatening to give a check, which would have been very, very dangerous. Now Magnus gives a little check to the king, and well, you have to sort of move your king. So he goes king f5, he goes up, and if the main plan of Aryan is, if he gets knight e7 and knight g6 and picks this pawn, then attacks this, he should be fine. But Magnus again takes this pawn. It seems like he's calculated stuff. If check and knight here, what's his plan? No, he first goes b3. He tells Magnus, I also have a pawn to distract your rook. And so Magnus plays rook b6. Now the rook has to keep an eye here. But what if knight e7, king c4, knight g6? I'm attacking your pawn. There's no way to defend it. He goes knight e7. And Magnus goes king c4 back. Now if knight g6, and if you take here, then I'll take this. But if you give a check here, Then I go back, and you can't take this pawn because there's b2. No, what Magnus did is simply captured the knight. Wow, he's gone into king and pawn endgame. Is this working? Takes the pawn. Oh my god, Magnus has actually analyzed that after king f5, king c4, king e5, king c5, he'll block it, he'll push the king in and eventually win this pawn, go here, win this pawn, and Aryan is busted. He has to resign here, mainly because the white king is more active than the black king. Wow, in the end he sacrificed the rook for the knight and won that endgame. What a magical play by Magnus Carlsen there. He just played an unbelievable endgame there, showing all the important things of patience, zugzwang and all these points. I'll let you hear what Magnus and Aryan analyze here.